Perfect. It's really great. I'm glad everybody's here. Good evening. I am David Stamps, and I'd like to welcome you to another public forum sponsored by the Laconia Human Relations Committee. This forum is also being live streamed on YouTube. It will also be available later. You can find it on our Facebook. I would like to thank the Belknap Middle Society, especially Tara and Karen, and their staff for their support. And let's have a round of applause for them. They have generously donated the space for our use. I'd also like to thank Mayor Hosmer. I don't see a city councilor. Oh, you're not a city councilor. He's the mayor. Thank him. And the City of Laconia administration for their support. I'd especially like to thank all the Human Relations Committee for their hard work in helping make this forum happen. And thanks to all of you here, as well as our virtual audience for joining us. There will be two parts to this program. The first part will be a panel discussion, and the second part will be an audience dialogue with the panel. I ask all of you to be respectful of each other, keep your remarks or questions short, and allow others time and space as well. One of our committee goals has been to help all of us understand the present by focusing on the past. In 2020, at our annual celebration of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Tom White helped us tell the story of Jonathan Daniels, an Episcopal priest who made the ultimate sacrifice while saving the life of Ruby Sales during a voter registration drive in 1965. Even though I was a young SNCC volunteer in Ohio, it was not a story I remembered. But seeing the documentary film, Here I Am, Send Me, 55 years later reminded me of the struggles, the losses, as well as the possibilities for redemption that continue to evolve from history's darkest times. We've chosen tonight to focus on Holocaust and genocide education because it too provides a rich source of material on the worst and best of humanity. On the one hand, all of us need to understand not just the unbelievable atrocities, all the unbelievable atrocities which were committed in the name of racial and ethnic cleansing, but also how they came to be. On the other hand, we should celebrate the myriad ways that people helped and supported each other, often sacrificing everything. From the lessons of history, perhaps we can avoid or mitigate future genocides through understanding and education. To help us think about these questions, we have Tom White, who will MC tonight's program. He will introduce the other panelists. Tom is the coordinator of educational outreach for the Cohen Center for the Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College. He taught for 16 years at Keene High School before receiving a fellowship to create his current position. He is responsible for organizing Holocaust and genocide awareness and prevention educational programs, developing educational materials, assisting teachers and school districts with curriculum development, training teachers and institutes, staff development programs, and through an annual workshop series working with survivors and witnesses. Maintaining a speakers bureau, visiting schools, speaking to civic and community groups, maintaining the center's website and social media sites, coordinating their listserv for teachers, coordinating events commemorating April as Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month in New Hampshire. And he currently serves on the New Hampshire Governor's Commission on Holocaust and Genocide Education. We're so fortunate to have Tom White with us. Please give him a hand.
Thank you, and it is such a pleasure to be with you tonight, and I really appreciate our whole panel does, you coming out tonight to join us. And what we want to do is a series of sort of introductions of our panel. We're all going to say a little bit along the way, and then we want to have everyone here have a chance to ask their questions and sort of bounce ideas off of us as well. So your being here is very important as we move forward. So what a lovely space, what a lovely town. Thank you so much for your warm welcome. Our panel tonight will be including myself, Senator Jay Kahn. And Jay has been a prime mover and shaker, not only at Keene State College when I received my position at the Cohen Center, but also in passing such important legislation as the Holocaust and Genocide Education Bill. Jay has been a key player here. In green, lovely lady tonight, Kati Preston, who is a Holocaust survivor. She was rescued as a... And Kati and I have known each other for many years, and I learned from her every time she speaks. She was a hidden child when she was 5 in Hungary, in Transylvania. She'll tell you her story by a brave teenage girl who risked her life to save her. Kati will tell you more about that, and also what happened to her extended family at Auschwitz. And then we are also really honored to have 2 classroom teachers, Ashley Harbel, who will give, I'm sorry. And I've watched Ashley now for the last couple of years, and now I'm honored to serve on the commission with her. An extraordinary classroom teacher, which is now only a distant memory for me. And so I tap into her expertise. And Evan and I always pronounce your last name incorrectly, so.
Czyzowski.
Czyzowski, who I also, sorry, Evan. I've also worked with for years on the state level as well, and his work is extraordinary, and I don't want to tell you more, but again, another experienced classroom teacher who brings his students to Poland as well, and he'll tell you more about that. So we have some real experts in the room that can help us. I want to start the evening by turning the microphone over to Senator J.J. Kahn.
Thank you, Tom. Not sure to stand, but right, easier? Good. So I am a state senator from Keene. I represent most of Cheshire County, one of 24 state senators. And I guess I've had a pretty privileged existence living in Keene. That is, we get to benefit from the Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, which brought me to the matter of the teaching of the Holocaust and genocide is the art of the possible. I've been observing this for, I guess, 23 years. Close to 25, because it was coming up on an anniversary soon, where summer institutes for teachers, workshops throughout the year, Kristallnacht, Remembrance Days for the last 20 years in Keene. The Holocaust itself is a galvanizing experience in history, because there is nothing that approaches it in its both in its act to exterminate a population based on its religion, the Jewish faith, people in Europe, and secondly, in the way how thoroughly it's documented, and the ability then to use that documentation as teaching artifacts. And so it is history, and it can be taught. So when we approached this conversation in 2019, we were riding on the heels of another 12 states that had already adopted Holocaust and genocide education as a part of their state curriculum for elementary and secondary schools. There was a big opportunity to align ourselves with a variety of groups besides us who serve on the Holocaust and Genocide Education Commission. Aligned with us as we were working on legislation were the Bishop and Diocese of Manchester, the Council of Churches, and so both Bishop Lavashi and Zach Harmon from the Council of Churches are on the commission, and we benefit from that kind of diversity and range of thought and the kind of alliance that brought. In the testimony on the bill, there were about 22 people who testified. Only 2 people questioned whether we should be moving forward. When this was adopted or passed in the Senate, it passed 24-0. It went over to the House and it passed 318 to 18, I believe. And because I see our House member who I recognize from this area, I'm sorry, name blocked, but no, okay. But I want to introduce you. Dave Hewitt. Thank you. Dave Hewitt, because I've worked with you on finance. is our common ground, or at least it was 2 years ago. All right, so it had overwhelming support. We've got the signature of the governor. There are now 19 states that have adopted Holocaust and genocide education. And so where is the state of New Hampshire now? Well, this commission is designed to bring forward guidance on how to write those rules. We are before the State Board of Education, and I expect that they'll adopt the rules in August. That will go through a hearing process and be adopted sometime around the cusp of 21-22. Important to this legislation is not just the teaching of the Holocaust, it's the teaching of genocide as well. Because we live in a world that is full of conflict. Some that are planned atrocities and violence against portions of a population that are isolated in their own countries. And so it's not just a matter of history, it's a matter of understanding history so that we can understand the current and we can prevent the future. And that's the challenge. So just to tee it up so that we've got some common knowledge, definition, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a nation, national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And if you just pick up Time magazine this last week, you'll see on both coasts of Africa acts of violence that rise to planned acts against certain populations and countries. You can read about this in Syria or in China or in Myanmar. It is, we can't get mired just in the past. We've got to recognize that humankind has not grown and learned. We continue to commit acts of genocide, and we need to be a population of people, of humanity, a common humanity that has a basis for speaking out and addressing genocide wherever that may occur. So that's part of our mission through education. And let me now turn this back to Tom, who will present this to the next presenter.
Thank you, Senator Kahn. With a shout out positive to the YouTube audience, I like to wander, which means I'm going to go beyond the art of the camera, but you'll hear my disembodied voice if you're watching from YouTube. The Cohen Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Keene State College is, if not the nation's oldest Holocaust centers, one of the oldest. Founded in 1983 by all people of Quaker sociologists who was studying race relations in the United States. And I won't get into that whole story, but you should be very proud of New Hampshire's contribution to the field of Holocaust and genocide studies and prevention. What I thought I'd do to start tonight is to sort of weave you into this conversation by asking you a few questions along the way. We may or may not interact, but I want you to think about some of the topics that I'm going to raise. This will be a relatively short presentation, but touch upon some of the issues we all must deal with. And I would argue in our country as well, in this current time we are facing, I think, a real threat to freedom. And that is what I want to talk about as well. So beginning here, as my disembodied voice now echoes over YouTube.
I have to warn you, that's all mirror reversed, so you need to read that out for people
Very good.
in the.
So everybody help hold the mirror up if you are that or ready. This is teaching the Holocaust and mass atrocity. I use mass atrocity because that will include war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. There is no hierarchy of crime. There's no crime that's worse than another. Anyone who suffers the most. These are legal concepts. And as we're looking at these, of course, the holding slide, for me, all of our work in education always is around prevention and hope. And the more that we educate each other on this and take responsibility, I really believe those flowers can come out of that gravel, if that's a sort of appropriate metaphor. Remembrance, education, building resiliency are really our charges here. So I want to begin by asking you this very broad question and get whatever thoughts come to mind about simply this. Why is it that we study such a very difficult topic? Why do we study genocide and mass atrocity? What do we hope to achieve? So I welcome anyone's thoughts. Why are we doing this? I'll go way up back, yes.
If we don't study our history, we're doomed to repeat it.
Right, and what was it, Mark Twain who said history never repeats itself, it rhymes? We're hearing those rhymes right now in our country. Do we push them away and say, no, this is a study about somewhere else, another time, another group of people. It doesn't really concern us. So the warning, right, we study this as a warning, as a wake-up call to sort of connect with things that are very important. Thank you for starting us off. Other thoughts, yes?
When we recognize someone else's humanity, we recognize our own.
Beautiful, thank you. And I've had to come to this understanding, right? I think many of us do. For me, for those on the panel who know me, I love to project myself. I love to be the center of the stage. It took a very long time to say what I feel doesn't matter as much as the face of the other person. And so I get this, as I tell kids when I present, right? In the morning I wake up, and I don't want to see my face in the mirror looking at me. I want to see Kathy's face looking at me. Oh my God. Scary in and of itself. What are you doing in my bathroom? But I want to see the face of the other who I may not be paying attention to. And I think that's what our country actually is rooted deeply in. Listening to and looking at the face of the other. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't it also be to honor the memory of victims and also to specify crimes and the people who committed them, the individuals who committed them?
And the first part is so true to my heart because I was just at a week-long institute and I met this lovely woman from Burundi. And she had lost her father, much of her family. And I was, the first time I met her, my first thought was, I want to tell your story, but not just your story, the story that was lost for your family. And the part of that conversation that I drove over to my house is I said, do you have any photographs of your childhood? Which is often what survivors never have. That's been taken away from them. She says, no, I don't, because in our custom, in our tradition, if someone has passed on, you destroy everything related to them because you don't want them to have a burden in the afterlife. So she had no pictures of her father, who was murdered when she was 16. So I brought her to my home, which is filled, of course, with family images, but very self-consciously saying, am I wounding her? Right? So, and she said just the opposite. She said, oh, what a blessing you have living in New Hampshire, that you can trace your roots back. Vahid Namanovich, a survivor from Bosnia that we're very close with, when he comes to visit Kahn, the first place he goes, the cemetery. They have no cemeteries. And that's his way of communing with the past. So that's a beautiful. And the second point you make, which is, I forgot the phrase of it.
To acknowledge and specify the criminal acts and those who committed them.
And I think I'm going to use this as my transition moment, which was he was talking about using really these criminal behaviors, right, to sort of identify them. To what end would be the question, right? What would you hope would be achieved by really convicting someone of one of these crimes?
Well, first, for the historical record,
Yeah.
specify who did what specifically. And secondly, to show that there can be some kind of reaction against specific individuals for specific actions, that they're not able to hide in the chaos of the events, especially big events.
Thank you, everyone, and a rich beginning here. These are some of the people that I work with, and I think that what you've brought up already touches upon these themes already. And so here we have Kati, another lovely picture of Kati. Very nice. And we have our Holocaust survivor, Vahid, who I just mentioned, from Bosnia, and from Cambodia, former UN ambassador, Szechuan Sid. And each of those have a different story. Each of them are related to the crimes of mass atrocity and genocide. And what we say is every experience is unique. No event is more unique than another. And so you're looking at different expressions of genocidal atrocity. When we work with our students, what we want to try to identify, and with our teachers as well, is that genocide is really an attack on identity. I want to play with this theme for a second, and I don't want to take up too much time here, but I want to ask sort of this question, who am I? And there are two ways that we approach this in our institutes. We ask teachers to sort of fill out 6 panels. And, well, I've jumped ahead of myself here. And we say, give me 6 of your social identities that really describe who you are at this moment in time. It could be a professional, it could be a son, daughter, mother, whatever it might be that identifies you socially, who you are connected with. And 2 ways to do this. One, we would say, so here are some examples, right? Race, social class. All of these, as you know, many of them are social constructs that we find ourselves either belonging to or being appropriated toward, right? And as we look at this, we would ask the teachers, write down the 6 that you really identify you. Now cross one off. The first one's relatively easy. Give me the other 5. You can find that. Cross the second one off. Becomes a little more difficult. Cross the third. Really get down to 1. So the way I want to look at it with you tonight, because I really can't do that exercise with you, would be to think of the 4 identities that you currently have, and it may be something other than what's here, that identifies you socially, in and amongst other people. And as you look at some of the examples here, identify the 4 that right now, tonight, stand out for you, that would describe you, really your social identity. Because what we'll then do is say, fine, of the 4 that you're thinking of here, these might be some of the 4. I'd like you to think of 1, only 1, that would now describe you to your neighbors. Now, if I had time, that's a very difficult exercise, to go from 4 that really means something to you down to 1. What I wanted you to see is that all of us are, of course, complicated human beings. Our identities are fluid, are changing, but are all social. The difficulty in trying to teach the genocide aspect of all of this is I had you make those decisions. When it's mass atrocity crimes, it's the perpetrator who defines who you are and what identities do not belong to you. And so genocide, we study it as the destruction of the social fabric and of your social identity. And often, it doesn't matter if you are a member of the group that the perpetrator put you in, right? It's the perpetrator who is saying you are a member of that group. Whether you are or not is irrelevant. And so perpetrators are the force here, identifying who you are and why you must be targeted, regardless of who you think you are. So the Burundi survivor that I mentioned said this last week. She said, I didn't know I was black until I came to the United States. What a fascinating statement for me as I observed this beautiful black woman. But what she's talking, of course, is structural race in the United States. She suddenly now is black. What does that mean, right? The layers of that meaning in our society. For a survivor of Srebrenica in Bosnia, it never occurred to me that I was Muslim. As they rounded up the Muslims from the surrounding villages outside that protected area of Srebrenica and murdered the men and boys and raped the women, right? And now, post-genocidal atrocities, identities are now glued. Whereas you may have thought you were a Muslim, after this event, you are a Muslim. And you accept that identity. So this continues, of course, after the atrocity. So destroying or reducing social identity is a precursor framework to the actual physical extermination of the group. And as you think about that construct, you have to think about in places like our country, where people begin to define who you are, who matters, who does not, which social identities have capital, which ones don't, which ones have access to materials, and which ones don't. The next question, as we begin to wind this down, is I'm showing you images here of the combat of Auschwitz. This is crematory 1 at Auschwitz 1. This is Latko Mladic, the Serb commander who slaughtered the people of Srebrenica. His sentence was just upheld in the court. These are in Rwanda. These are killers in Rwanda. And what I want to just tease with you is this next question. How would you describe the people who are capable of doing such things? Any ideas are helpful. How would you describe them? You can just shout it out.
Fearful.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Fearful, afraid.
Fearful. Fascinating. They're afraid of something, and I think that's a hugely important identity factor. Something is threatening to their identity, especially their social identity they're responding to. Thank you. How else would you describe them?
Amoral.
Amoral, right? These are people who have no morality, that they are in fact just to kill, right? We know what killers look like, and in fact, Kathy will talk about her next initiative of meeting with some of these folks in jail. Other words you would have to describe them. Yes, sir.
True believers.
True believers. So ideology functions here, right? So there's some kind of construct, meaning?
It's just that they're afraid of the wrong things. And that makes them unwise, because if you're afraid of God, that's the beginning of wisdom.
Right. Thank you. I love it. These are all wonderful thoughts. My next question would be, how do you think your students would describe perpetrators? And as I'll just wrap this up quickly here, right, they're going to describe what you just said and even more. Things that would then move them away from themselves being a perpetrator, right? These are evil, horrible human beings, not too smart, follow the crowd, all those kind of things we've been taught are bad things. But of course, all of that gets destroyed when you start studying this topic. The Nuremberg trials, and all the psychiatrists went in and tried to find the Nazi gene, right? What made the Nazi do what he did? And then an IQ test, right? We're holding IQ tests, and I forget what the average here are, right? It comes out of eugenics, but anyway. That we want these people to kind of have very low IQs. And at Nuremberg, all of them, except for one, had extraordinary IQs. Genius level in some cases, right? The only one who was off was Julius Streicher, and he thought that the other Nazis said, we don't want to try with him. He makes us look bad, right? You know you're in bad shape, but a Nazi says, that guy makes us look bad, right? And as we go further, though, how would perpetrators describe themselves? And as we play with that idea, I want to just tell you the story. And I would not tell this story if there were children present. We're in Rwanda church. Many, as the killings began instantaneously, with heavy Catholic churches, but they thought they'd be safe. Except many of the priests were working with the killers. And it became a collection spot for mass atrocity. And in this particular church, one by one, with a machete, everybody inside was hacked to death. Grenades were thrown in afterward. One woman had her throat slashed and was left for dead. She crawled out of the building before the grenades came in. Everybody she knew had just been murdered, including her family. She crawled out of this building, and adjacent to it was the day school, the kids' school. And all the kids were there. She passed out and come to consciousness back and forth, and she couldn't get into the building. She was outside. She would come in and out of consciousness to hear the slapping noise. No idea what she was hearing. And am I imagining what is slapping, what is slapping? Eventually, when she came to consciousness, she crawled in, and all the kids had been murdered. And against the wall, deeply dead, and it's still there today, was a bloodstain that had gone into the wall. What had happened? The perpetrators had picked up the children and smashed their heads against the wall. That was a slap, and slap, and slap. When they arrested the perpetrator, here's what you should know. 1 week before this, he's a Catholic man. He's gone to Mass with his fellow Catholics. He's a local soccer coach. He's also the CCD leader who had educated those children a week before killing them. When they asked him, why did you do this? His response was, that's not who we are. This isn't us. Something overcame me. I don't know what happened. And he said, I would never do something like that. I don't know what possessed me. And then, like every perpetrator, they begin to justify it. That's where ideology starts to come in. I did this because those people are this way. They don't often use that in the killing process, but afterward to justify the behavior. And then they play the victim card. Well, we had to do this because they were coming after us. These are the kids from the soccer team. So I tell you this story because it gets much more difficult when you look at perpetrator behavior and realize that's all of us. In a situation that changes, where power comes in, and you have to make real choices about, do I want to live? Do I want to participate? And often, it's not even what was there, but what you perceive was there. For example, in the Holocaust. We have no evidence of any German ever being executed for refusing to kill Jews, or the other target groups at all. But there's clear belief that that might happen, right? But there's not a single documented case. In Rwanda, there was. In Rwanda, if you did not participate, they would have killed you right there as well. So each one has its own unique story. So ideology and victimhood that we often think about as the driving factors, maybe the fear factor comes in here, right? They see themselves as victims and what are the justifications psychologically for their behavior so they can continue. That behavior described as smashing children against the wall took place during the Holocaust. It took place with the U.S. cavalry in the West against Native American tribes. And so as we look at identity, and we looked at some of the social identity, and I would have said, all right, when we come in, I have a box by the door. I want you to drop in that box all the kind of behaviors that you think are influenced by the groups you belong to. Those groups could be your family, could be your sports club, could be your art group, could be whatever, right? And as we put all those things in there, and we talk about how does that shape who you want to be and what you do, and for me, I want to be a good son, to my folks. That motivates me. When I go to work, I'll be a good worker, So these things influence me. Then I would say, let's pick up that box and move it across the room to the perpetrator group. And you're going to find the exact same aspirations, hopes, motivations, influences. All that's changed is the circumstances. So it's not that groups make you bad. Groups amplify the members present who have their own initiative. So you're in a group, good, happy people doing really great things. You know what that does. You're in another group, but the same motives are at play with a different outcome. When you have extraordinary events like Holocaust, genocide, the human mind wants extraordinary explanations, right? And we played with some of those earlier on, but what we find out is you have an extraordinary event with very normal human behavior. All you need is critical mass. It's not that you need a majority of people in the country to say, today we're going to commit mass atrocity. You just need enough. And we're starting to see the enough in our country. This is a crucial moment for us to stand up. There is too much at stake to ignore. So for me, you'll hear the bad apple analogy. A few bad apples. No. Looking at group behavior that dynamizes that individual behavior. So for me, I'm more interested in the barrel that holds those apples, right? What is that group telling you? What is it accepting? What is it encouraging? What kind of language is used? In that barrel, in private and public spaces, right? What are you saying about so-and-so when you're with friends? What are you saying in a school about so-and-so, right? That matters. And remember, the architects, the Nuremberg architects, or anyone you want to identify, none of them do the killing. It's the average person who becomes the foot soldiers who do the killing and sleep very well at night justifying it because they had to. As we wind this down, we've thought for many years you really couldn't identify where genocide came from, right? It was very complicated. But now we have enough data and information we now know. We know the process, and it's like a rhino. This is a new metaphor we all use, right? You see the rhino, you know it's going to provoke the rhino, you know when he starts charging at you, it's not going to be good, right? We know all that stuff now. We know how this happened. This is from Northern Ireland. This is one of the July bonfires that Protestants will burn in Northern Ireland to intimidate their Catholic neighbors. And when you look at the field of genocide, it becomes a perfect metaphor. Because we can now predict when those piles are being built, what sticks are being added, right? What social identities are being manipulated out of fear, out of whatever. What we can't identify is the spark that sets it aflame. What is the trigger? So we can identify the risk factors, the accelerants that things are speeding up, and the triggers. If we had time, I wasn't going to stop here in a moment. I tease out what those triggers might be, but I just want you to imagine what that might be. It could be an election. That's always a consistent. You should know a study was done. People who study the field of genocide, we have a matrix that we use. And we plug in the figure, we basically look at stats published by NGOs and others, and we plug in and we predict what countries are on the road to genocide. The study that was done in the United States, this was done in November, predicted violence between the election and the inauguration. So we must identify practice that separate and target people by identity, that shrink the public spaces. Here we are in this public space. I don't know what we're all thinking, but we're sharing the space together, and we can have divergent and different views. What a blessing this is. What a wonderful thing this is. We must do more of this. And that includes schools. This is why our educators are here. Promote identity-based polar factionalism, exclusive identities is a warning sign. And politics, of course, is a huge factor. Our risk factors here, just so you see, these are the kind of things that they plug into the models that they now use. And you should know, I won't point all these, but in governance, the most important aspect of any country is democracy. There's a variety of reasons for this, but if you're a democracy, you're less likely to have mass violence. But all these other factors contribute as well. You should know that the United States is nowhere near a genocide down, but for the first time, flags are coming in. And so what we do is prevention, upstream, midstream, and downstream. It's lovely to here at the stream. So it's simply this, right? You're standing by this lovely river out here, and somebody calls for help. You're going to try to help that person. You dive in, this is upstream prevention, right? You want to stop this from getting bigger, and you want to help that person. All of us should do that. Midstream. 10, 100, 400 people are now drowning in that river, and it's you. What do? Right? You try to tap in other groups that might be able to help out. Now it's 1,000, 2,000. And now after it's all done, you go one upstream, like, why are these people in the river? You want to try to figure that out. So that's kind of a metaphor what we're trying to do. Prevention starts locally. Evenings like this are super important. As you listen to people being targeted for their identity, and you say, no. We build trust by reinforcing structures of accountability, diversity. The rule of law is very important. Safe spaces where we leave, people feel dignity, direction, and empowerment. And we have intergenerational mentorship. We motivate and we teach the next generation with all your experience that you have. We must be appalled by the early stages. And that's what I think makes us a very interesting country. We have the Bill of Rights, which basically says that. The Bill of Rights are for minorities, not for the majority. The freedom to assemble, the freedom of speech. All these things are saying, because we know if we don't protect that, a momentum builds that can be devastating. And so we've been able to just wind this up. We do public memorials and remembrances here, but we also face our own difficult history. We must confront it. Even though it might be divisive, it's also important for all the reasons we started this conversation. I was just working a bit on, or learning a bit about the Lakota tribes in South Dakota. South Dakota has a financial incentive to divide their families. And we're going with DCS to take out the children from their parents, with generational impacts. of the Lakota tribe. So that is an ongoing, I would argue, mass atrocity happening in our country right now. In Keene, these are a mural project. We're facing our difficult past. We were an Abenaki land, and Pennacook land, and so we want to remember that. Jonathan Daniel was mentioned already, and on the right, we have Dr. Johnson, who was a black man in Keene, who tried to join the Navy in the Second World War by passing himself off as white. And the town split. Many went against him and many were for him. But the point is, we want to confront this difficult history because we know where it leads if it's left unconfronted. Which is why creating spaces like this organization has done is so important. When New Hampshire is the fourth state in the country to have April as Genocide Awareness Month, and here is Senator Kahn reading the declaration that Governor Sununu wrote, and you can see where New Hampshire is heading. And as we look at New Hampshire, we leave with New Hampshire, some stories you should know. This is Stephen Louis, being recognized with the Legion of Honor. Stephen is a German immigrant during the Second World War, a Jew, who fled Germany, Berlin, to come to America and join the U.S. Army. And he became an intelligence officer, a Ritchie boy. The Ritchie boys say, you know, immigrants, what can they give to our country? Well, this immigrant group of German Jewish refugees gave us about 68% of the battlefield intelligence and helped us win the Second World War. Governor Hassan here signing Genocide Awareness and Prevention Month in 2014. And here, Kati with the governor, we have the Holocaust and Genocide Prevention Education signing the law. And showing you the places where all this takes place, our classroom, another survivor from Hungary, Tom Weishaus, with New Hampshire students. And classrooms are our safest spaces for dignity and to build all the things we've done with our expert teachers in order to do this. I'm going to leave with a story, and it's not going to be on a positive note. We are born inherently worthy. We are also vulnerable to having that dignity violated. I just want to reinforce what I was talking about by talking about the Sonderkommando diary. The Sonderkommando were the people who were sentenced, their death sentence was to work in the gas chamber crematorium at Auschwitz. In this case, Zalman was part of the uprising in October, and he was killed trying to fight back. His diary worked its way to the surface. This is a man who had to do his job as a process people in the changing room, in the gas chamber. He had to pull them out of the gas chamber. He had to look at all the orifices to find out if there's any jewelry hidden there. He had about the bodies of his own family, who he was forced to work on. So his diary came to the surface, and he gives us this warning. Come here, you free citizen of the world, whose life is safeguarded by human morality, and whose existence is guaranteed through law. I want to tell you how modern criminals and despicable murderers have trampled the morality of life and nullified the postulates of existence. We may not be as safe as we think we are, but we are safe when we recognize the dignity of the other and say it stops now. So thank you. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. This is a website that has the commission information on it. And I thank you only because two reasons. I can show you one of my favorite places to grow is the marginal way of life with me, but also show you my child. Because in the end, as I look at children, that's whose future we're trying to get into. So thank you very much.
Wow, how can I follow this? Maybe tell jokes or something? Anyhow, my name is Kati Preston. I'm a Holocaust survivor. I was not in a camp. I was 5 years old when all this went down in my hometown in Hungary. My father was a Jew, my mother was a Catholic, but I was still slated to die because even if you had one grandparent who was a Jew, you had to die. And my mother tried to hide me in the house. She didn't have to be deported because Catholics were not considered tainted. She was not Jewish by blood. They only went by blood in Hungary. Didn't matter what your religion was. Although people tried to convert, it didn't help. But my mother tried to hide me at home, and when my whole Jewish family, 28 members, were taken into the ghetto, They had the list of everybody. The Hungarians were very good at keeping lists of every Jew where they lived. And they were rounded up. And the ghetto in our hometown had big walls around it with barbed wire, and everybody had to go in there. And my mother refused to have me go, and she decided to hide me. She didn't think they would notice a child missing. And at this point, this young woman came to see my mother. She used to bring our milk from the farm. And she was an orphan, and my mother had made her a beautiful wedding dress when she got married, and she never forgot it. And she heard that they were rounding up the Jews, and she came to my mother and said, "Where is your child? I'll take her to the country and I'll hide her." And she took me to her farm. She hid me in her hay barn. I was 5 years old, going from an existence of a little princess. I had everything, you know, I was spoiled rotten. And suddenly I was in this barn on my own, and she said to me, "You can't come into the house, you have to stay in the barn because people want to kill you." And she put me up in this dingy barn, and there were rustling noises in the hay, and I was terrified. And I cried and cried and cried. I cried for my mother and my father, for my beautiful life and my room and everything. And slowly, you know, you get used to it. I got used to being there. I got used to the fact that I wasn't allowed out. I got used to the fact that I had to be alone. And she kept telling me, when people come, you have to make yourself very small and hide because they want to kill you. And this idea of death was very alien to me, you know. How does a 5-year-old accept death? I'm 82, and I still ignore it, you know. Other people die. I don't. Anyhow, so the point is that I was stuck there, and I was hidden there, and she would have lost her life too had they found me. And one day, very early in the morning, I heard a commotion. And I looked through the cracks of the barn, and there were 3 soldiers in green uniform, Hungarian gendarmes. They had black feathers in their hats. And they were slapping this poor woman around, saying, "Where's the Jew? You're hiding a Jew. We know you're hiding a Jew." She says, "No, I'm not hiding any Jew. Go to my house and have a look." And they went up to her house, and they ransacked it. They were furious, and they come barging down past the barn, and one of them says, "Wait a minute. Let's look in the barn. Maybe she's hiding the Jew in the barn." And they came up these rickety stairs, and I remember she told me that if they came, I had to scooch under the hay, and I went under the eaves and put the hay over me, and I made myself really, really, really small. And I was trying not to breathe, but I was worried because my heart was beating so loudly. It sounded to me like a drum, and I was afraid they'd find me because of my heart. And they came closer and closer, and they were using their bayonets to look through the hay, which was all loose there were no hay bales. And they were coming closer and closer, and one of them stood right next to me, and I opened an eye, and I see this big boot next to my face, and the bayonet comes down about an inch from my face and gets stuck in the wood. And then curses, pulls it out, and they leave. And this is why I'm still here. They accidentally missed hitting me with a bayonet. After that, I did believe that death exists, and I thought, yeah, death means that somebody's going to stick a bayonet in you. But unfortunately, I'm the only survivor of my Jewish family. There were 28 members, including me. I'm the only one who's alive. And it's all thanks to this one girl who wanted to do the right thing. Without thinking. I'm sure she didn't think, well, if I do this, I might lose my life. She just instinctively did a nice thing because she had something nice done to her. She wanted to pay back. And unfortunately, there were not many people like that in Hungary. The Hungarian deportation and complete annihilation of the Jewish population happened in, I think, 3 or 4 months towards the end of the war. And there were only 120 Nazi officers who were in Hungary. All the rest of the rounding up of 750,000 Jews were done by the Hungarians, by our neighbors, by the people who wouldn't do such a thing, would they? I mean, you know, these were the people who we interacted with. They were people we had business with. There were people who went to school with the children. And yet they were able to, as a mass hysteria, to round up these people because they were told that the Jews were bad and they were going to wreck the country, and the only salvation would be to get rid of all the Jews. Plus, of course, they wanted their apartments. That was another incentive. And my father never came back, and I had a very nice stepfather who came to see my mother. We went to the railway station. We were told that some of the survivors were coming back from the camps, and we went to the railway station holding up a picture of my father, asking if people knew him. And people came off the train, and my father wasn't there. And that went on for 2 days, and the third day a man came to my mother and said, "Listen, don't wait for him, he's dead." And she says, "What do you mean he's dead?" And this poor man, who happened to be a friend of the family that my mother didn't even recognize, because these people coming off the train looked like ghosts. You couldn't tell if they were men or women. They were hunched over, they were wearing rags, they had no hair, they had sores, and they smelled bad, and I was scared of them as a kid. And this poor man told my mother that he was a friend of the family who she finally recognized. He and his wife and child were taken to Auschwitz, and when they were taken out of the train, automatically the wife and the child were put on one side and he was on the other. And he said to one of the guards, "Where are they going?" And the guard pointed to the chimney, which was smoking. And he didn't understand at that point. He did not understand what went on. And eventually my mother married this poor man. We cobbled together a family out of 2 broken families, but he was never my father and I was never really his daughter. And they came to New Hampshire with me, and when he was on his deathbed, he had Alzheimer's. He was holding my hand, calling me by his daughter's name. And I was so glad to be able to give him that last happiness. He thought she was there. And you know, how all this affected me, having heard how my father died. He stole a piece of bread in the camp, and him and another friend from town were found out, and the commander decided to make an example of them. So they took these 2 men, they stripped them naked, it was cold. They stripped them naked, beat them half to death with iron bars, and put each of them in a dog kennel in the big Appellplatz where the people used to be counted every day. The prisoners would stand and be counted every day. And it took my father 2 days and a night to die. And when I heard this, I was completely obsessed with revenge. I remember being a very sick child because all I could think of is killing and murder and how I would torture the people who did this to my father. And it took me 50 years to stop hating. I don't hate. I'm actually full of love. I have absolutely no hatred. I don't forgive because I can't forgive somebody else's death. And I always tell my children, if anybody kills me, and if you go and forgive them, I'll haunt you bad. But forgiveness, I can forgive for things that have been done to me, not things that have been done to someone else. And slowly over these years, I learned that if your heart is full of hatred, there's no room for anything else. And I had a very successful life. I was a nasty little overachiever, like a lot of the survivors are. And I had lots of careers, and I made money, and I had success. And the only thing that really matters is what I do now. I go to schools, and I speak to children. And I tell them about my life as a little girl during the Holocaust, because 6 million is a big number. You know, statistics don't bleed. And when you explain to a child that the little girl, who's not much different from them, was there and this is what happened, they get it. And the reception that I get from these kids, the love I get from these children, and the amount of love that comes pouring out of them, the letters, and they get it. And I tell them, look, you're the next generation that will save the world. You have to save the world because it needs saving. And you're not like the generation before. You're not prejudiced. You don't really care if somebody's blue, green, yellow, straight. They don't care. And yes, stay on your phones and communicate with each other because you need each other, and listen to your heart and you will be okay. And I'm very optimistic. I know it's very dangerous at the moment, but I still believe that this country is going to right itself. Thank you very much. I forgot to ask if you have any questions. As you can see, I have no filters, so go ahead and ask me questions. I can answer anything. Oh my God, it's quiet here.
Maybe give them time to process that. And we're gonna do questions after.
All right, we'll do questions after as well. Okay.
Give them time to.
I'll give you time to process.
Yeah,
Okay.
The educator.
Okay, the educator. Okay.
I don't know how we can follow that. I've heard Kati speak several times now.
Oh, yep,
and every time I'm just very touched by everything that she says, and I know Evan's the same way.
The kids are amazing.
Kati comes to both of our schools and speaks at both of our schools, and this year with Zoom and the magic of the pandemic, one of the great things that came out of this is I was actually able to have like 5 different survivors come and speak, including second generation via Zoom, including a survivor from Israel, and it was just really powerful to have all of those stories. So thank you again for coming to speak to all of our kids. I'm actually Harbel. I am an English teacher at Sanborn Regional High School over in Kingston, New Hampshire. I primarily teach 9th grade, and I also created a year-long Holocaust studies course that I started, petitioned for, created, and teach. In the 9th grade curriculum, we do teach Night, so that's about like a 2-month unit, and we read Night by Elie Wiesel. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest his trilogy, it's amazing. And I guess we'll just talk about kind of like what we teach and why we teach it. And then like, we definitely welcome questions, 100%. And I know we're gonna have to panel after, but feel free to jump in and ask questions if you want to. For me, this Holocaust education bill that passed and the work that we're doing on the commission is so important. I have been an educator for 14 years, and in all 14 years, I have taught Holocaust in some shape or form. Originally, I was a middle school teacher in Connecticut and moved to New Hampshire and moved to high school. So I've taught it in my English classroom for many years, but that's not the case in the majority of the schools. You would be surprised by how many students tell us that they have no clue what the Holocaust is. I have students who come into my 9th grade class, and whether it's by, they just didn't have the right teacher, or it wasn't in the curriculum, or they moved into the district, but there are students who have never heard that word before. And as an educator, one of our main purposes, at least in my mind, is to really build up this global citizen, right? This student that is going to go into the world and go into our communities, both our local communities and our global community. And I just tell them at the end of the day, like, be a good human being, right? But how are we teaching them to be a good human being? And I forget who said it, right? But learning from the lessons of our past is such an important piece of that. So for me, when I teach about the Holocaust, there's kind of like 2 key aspects that I focus on. The first, for me, is bearing witness. That kind of goes back to the idea, Tom talked about it a little bit, and someone had mentioned it, about elevating survivor and victim voices, right? And Kati just said how, her story is one story. And as an English teacher, that's such an important moment for our students. Those students who do know about the Holocaust often know the final piece, right? I went to Poland with Yad Vashem a couple of years ago, and I was really fortunate to speak to the director of a museum in Poland, and he kind of equated it to a car crash. A lot of the times what we learn about the Holocaust is we learn about the car crash itself. We don't learn about the history before. We don't learn about what happens to the survivors, the victims' families after. We just see the crash. We see the final solution, and that's all our students know about that history. But learning about the Holocaust and other genocides is so much more than that. It's about hearing all of the different stories that you can, which is why it's so important that we are able to have survivors like Kati come in and tell their stories. My students hear from second generation, they hear from hidden children, they hear from a survivor who was in a camp They read books. We use witness testimony. The ADL and Yad Vashem and the USC Shoah Foundation have amazing testimonies. I don't know if anyone is an educator in this room or even just interested, but there's some amazing, just even short clips of testimonies, right? I use like 2-minute clips in my classroom so that my students get more than one voice. They hear more than one story, which is such an important piece to me. I have this book in my room that I start with that was a present actually from the former head of the ADL when I went to a conference in New York City. And in the book, the entire book except the front dedication page is the word Jew written 6 million times. In this one book, in this one volume. And we start the unit by looking at what does 6 million actually look like. And we talk about how each 6 million is an individual person and an individual voice, and how powerful that moment is for our students as they flip through that book and they see this is 6 million. That's like a number that you can't wrap your head around, right? 6 million is so many people. And to think about all of the victims who lost their lives, just to give students a glimpse into that and talk about how we're bearing witness. We are now the carriers of these stories. It's now our job moving forward to bring these stories and to say that the Holocaust was real. I've been to Auschwitz multiple times. I've been to places of mass execution. I've been to the Warsaw Ghetto, the Krakow Ghetto. I stood in these places where people lost their lives, and we both brought students several times to Auschwitz, and we can bear witness. And our students hearing these survivors speak in their stories, they can bear witness now too. And they can say, this did happen. This is real. I now know, and I'm going to share your story moving forward. And so that's one piece that's really important to me. The other piece that I think is really important, and why I kind of use the Holocaust as the center of our genocide study, is really kind of twofold. One was talked about before, about how just like evidence-wise, there's so much evidence when it comes to the Holocaust. The perpetrators, the Nazis, they were meticulous in their documentation, the camps that are like still there, the photographs that were taken. We studied the Auschwitz album, which was an album of Hungarian Jews and photos that were taken. That's a really powerful resource for us. Photos that were taken, that's a really powerful resource for us. Shabbat archives from the Warsaw Ghetto. There's so much that we can take from and so many primary sources.